Okay, I don't want to hold anyone up any longer. We'll get going and as people filter in, please jump in and ask any questions that you might want to ask. So I'm just going to hear and I'm going to welcome you to Gray Associates Higher Education Demand Trends webinar. Our presenter today will be Bob Atkins. That's Gray's CEO, program evaluation expert, and best-selling higher education author. There are a few housekeeping items to get started with. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a place labeled Q&A. Please feel free to add your questions there. We'll get to as many as we can during the session, and we will certainly follow up later with you if we run out of time. You can also feel free to post questions or comments in the chat area. Have you been wondering about launching a particular new program or what the potential job market looks like for your students? At the end of the presentation, we will give you the opportunity to review programs in real time with PES and Gray's Director of Customer Success. So you can pop your program request into the Q&A at any time during the presentation. You will receive a link to the webinar recording and the presentation slides within a day or two. Please look for it in your email. And now, without further ado, I will turn things over to Bob.
Thank you very much, Marianne. And thanks again to all of you for joining us today. And I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment finally after a year of doing this to thank Monica Bilson, who actually pulls together this presentation for me every month. So it's been a wonderful break for me, and I think it's a great presentation. So thank you, Monica. And you all be the judge of whether that's really true or not. So let's see. We're talking about demand for higher education, and that demand has two facets: student demand and employer demand. Both of those are part of what we call a program evaluation system. And specifically, they're part of the markets data that goes into that system, which includes data on student demand, employment, competition, and appropriate degree level, we call it degree fit. So that's markets. But to evaluate a program, you need to know about more than just the market for the program. You also need to understand the margins. Does it make money or lose money? Is it a big program that can fund other smaller programs that may not be able to stand on their own 2 feet, but are aligned with the mission of the institution? And then we turn to academic standards. Are students passing? Are they matriculating from freshman to sophomore year? How many student credit hours are we teaching? Do they graduate? All dimensions of academic standards that need to be considered along with a number of others. So that's another important consideration. And finally, and most important, is mission, and to what degree the individual program is aligned with and supportive of the mission of the institution. And as I mentioned, it's fine to have a program that doesn't make money if it directly supports the mission. It may even be essential to offer that program in a mission-driven institution. So this isn't about making money necessarily. It's just about making sure you have the right balance of money-making programs and others that are generate less income, so that the whole system works. If you will, there's a web of cross subsidies that sits under there. Now, when you go to make a decision, you need more than data. You actually need to get the right people in process, in the right process, in order to make good decisions that will actually get implemented at your institution. So keep that in mind. That's what a program evaluation system is. It's more than data, it's more than software. It's all of that, plus the right people in process to make effective program decisions. Now let's turn to my favorite topic, which is student demand. We have a number of indicators on student demand. Google and enrollment Google's forward-looking. Enrollment's pretty current. It's updated 3 times a year. We now have spring semester of 2020. No, not 2023 in there. We have fall 2022 in the data set. So it's not absolutely up to date, but it's pretty darn current. On the other hand, iPads is actually pretty out of date, very authoritative. Everybody's in there, all your Title IV schools report. But intrinsically, I think that data is current as of spring 2021. Monica, correct me if I'm wrong. And we're looking at people who made up their mind about what programs to offer 4 to 6 years before that. So we're looking at data from 2015 still in terms of what students want. So iPads is great for how big is this program. It's not so great for what are the trends right now in student demand for a program. So we'll report out and share data with you on Google and enrollment, where we have good current information for you. Starting with Google, how to read this chart. First, the dark line is 2021. The blue line is 2022. and that green color is 2023. And what we're hoping for here is what we see on this chart, which is the dark line's the lowest, i.e. We've been growing since then. 2022 or the blue is higher than that. And then 2023, we'd love to have be higher than that still. And that's really what we're seeing. So while we've been through a lot of difficult times in higher ed, I think the indicators are that should start to abate and we should start to see an increase in demand. We are seeing that at the community college level, enrollment's up there, and that will flow through to you all and transfer students in about another year. But I also see primary demand being relatively strong. So very encouraged by that. It's been a long, hard time for many of you, and I appreciate that. And I hope that this is going to show up in fall enrollment. How much is it up? About 3% this month, and it's been up at similar numbers for the last few months. What's growing? And this is a really important point here. There are about a half a dozen programs account for well over 40% of all the growth in higher ed. So if you're not in the right programs, it's very difficult to grow. One of those programs is business analytics. So at the bachelor's level, it's up 218%. AI is very hot, as you might imagine, up 109%. And then we get to more what I would call mainstream programs, organizational leadership. We have a couple of other techs, data entry, and cybersecurity, information assurance. And then we have just a range of other things. I'm sorry, I should touch on healthcare. Always big and growing now, which is very encouraging. We really need more nurses in school because we need more nurses in the workforce. And there's been a little downtrend there, which is very worrisome in terms of the overall, I would say, health of our healthcare system, if you will. You can see surge tech and clinical lab medical tech in there as well. The Big 10, as in what are the biggest programs, and now we're talking about just overall highest search volume. Let's start with health, registered nursing, social work, psychology, and physical therapy all make the top 10. And then it's really a range of other things. We've got some tech, computer science, cybersecurity, and data analytics, and then just a variety of things, business, law, and human resources, all making the top 10 in terms of search volume. On the brand side of things, so if you think about the world, some students will pick their program first and then look for a college that has that program. I want to become a nurse, so I'm going to look for colleges that have nursing programs. That's what we're just touching on in terms of programmatic growth. But there's another group of students who are really picking among different schools or brands, and that's what we see here. So think of it as two fundamentally different approaches to search. And you can see the trends are fairly different. If you recall on our earlier chart, the programmatic search was generally up for the through the last 15 months. Here, it's been a little bit of a closer call, and we actually had a decline in January and February. Then it began to tick up in March, flat in April, and fortunately, we're up about 3% in May. So both of these indicators, program search and brand search, are now headed up. It remains to be seen with this one in particular, whether this uptick is a blip or a trend, but I'm encouraged to see at least this month it's up. Now let's take a look at enrollment. Here, again, I was looking at community college enrollment just yesterday, and that has turned around for a couple of semesters. Here, it's a little bit more difficult story for new enrollment in bachelor's programs. It's been going down, popped up in 2021, 22, and then fall spring new enrollment in 2023 down a little bit. We switch over and look at master's programs. That's been just inconsistent. Little decline in 18-19, another big increase in 19-20. Then we had a drop, and we had another big drop in master's program enrollment in fall and spring 22-23. Not sure what's driving that, but obviously very concerning to see a drop off like that in what had been a pretty good sector for higher ed for a long time. Now, in fall spring, what had the highest new enrollment? So now we're looking at enrollment statistics and what business, as you would expect, largest program out there. I'm a little surprised by our next two, biology in second place and psychology in third. Nursing at fourth, not a surprise. And we've got kinesiology and exercise science, another healthcare program making the top 10 a little bit lower on the chart. Computer science in the STEM fields, engineering and mechanical engineering all make the top 10. Computer science has really been a winner here recently, though it's getting cannibalized to some extent by cybersecurity, but still one of the larger programs out there and still growing. So what's growing the fastest? Oh, well, business analytics. That's been red hot, and really it's very similar to data analytics or data science. So if you put those two together, you have a very large, fast growing opportunity. I had mentioned cybersecurity. That's also grown very well, both the associates and the bachelor's level, and actually it's very healthy at the master's level as well. And up here we can see it's up 21% year over year. Then we have other things, logistics, exercise physiology, real estate development, architecture, sports, and radiation, all up 15% or more. And I jumped over statistics because that really harkens back to our discussion there of business analytics, data science, and statistics. You've got three of your more analytical programs making the top 10 at the same time in terms of growth, all growing at least 15% or more, two of them growing closer to 30%. Look at the masters. It's a bit different. We get IT project management, top of the list, psychiatric, mental health nursing, number 2, data analytics, similar at the master's level to undergrad, growing 32%, IT growing 24%, and so forth down the line here. We've got another one of your the computer programs, human-computer interaction, up 7%, a healthcare program, physician assistant, up 6%. I personally think that physician assistant and a nurse practitioner are going to be really critical programs, not just for colleges, but actually to fill in a lot of the gaps in our healthcare system, especially in rural America, where there's a shortage of MDs. Now, in addition to regular programs taught by colleges, there are all sorts of other courses out there and certificates, and we're going to take a look at some of those and what the trends are. I think a lot of us felt that the MOOCs had dropped out of the picture, and that's where many of these courses are offered, in the massively open online course delivery systems, that's MOOCs. And I think it dropped out of the press for a while. This is a very hot topic 4 or 5 years ago, and everybody was predicting how the MOOCs were going to kill higher ed. Well, here we all are, and the feeling is that that didn't happen. I think that's a little bit deceptive. I think we may be a bit of the frog in the tepid water that's getting hotter, and the MOOCs have actually been doing very, very well over a period that's been quite difficult for higher education. So as you look at this chart, this is Coursera, one of the largest MOOCs. This is Udemy, the largest. And just sort of ignoring this drought, they've been on a pretty healthy upward climb for a while. And look at the sheer volumes of students enrolled. You know, we're 10 million here, a little over 10 million again here, and up to 12 million in May of this year. So just massive numbers of students enrolled. I'm sorry, that's the combined total of these two in these programs. Now, to put that in context, in the summer sessions, our traditional colleges have about 8 million students enrolled. That peaks in the fall at just about 18 million, and then drops back to about 14 million in the spring. So we're looking at numbers here in terms of initial enrollment in MOOCs that are approaching the number of students enrolled in all of higher ed. And this is just 2 of the MOOC providers. Now, these folks aren't paying very much money to take these courses. Many of them are free, and students will come in and drop out within hours. So it's not really the same as a course would be in a traditional college, where there's a commitment to come to college and stay for a little while. And most students are going to make it through at least their first few courses. So I'm not trying to make the parallel in the sense that this is the same as a traditional program at all. But I am a little surprised, honestly, to see just the sheer magnitude of number of people taking courses in MOOCs. I should also mention that this is global. Both of these are global entities, and many of the students taking these courses are from foreign countries. So strictly speaking, comparing it to US enrollment's a little off. But I did that primarily just to give you a sense of context of how big these numbers really are compared to our traditional enrollment.
Bob, we do
So,
have a question about MOOCs, if you don't mind.
sure.
How do you determine which MOOCs to pull information from?
Well, that is very easy. Only two provide information on their enrollment. And even those two, Udemy and Coursera, only tell us total enrollment since inception of their offers. So we have to go in every month and pull the most current month and subtract out the prior months in order to get the monthly data. So, but nobody else even reports it. So that's why we picked those two. I believe they're also the largest. In particular, Udemy is the largest, I think.
Thank you, Bob.
Let's see, what's fastest growing on Coursera? And I will say, we're going to cover Coursera today. Udemy is quite different. Udemy is going to be very heavily tech. And so you'll see a different makeup of the top 10 programs there, almost all coding related. This is a little bit more diverse platform on Coursera. Data analytics comes to the top, and we look at data and tech. We've got machine learning in the top 10 and software development per se in the top 10. Then we got a lot of business. 4 of the 10 programs are in business, design and product, leadership and management, business essentials, and support and operations. And a few somewhat random things, learning English, basic science, and personal development. So those are the big categories and what's going on within those in terms of courses. So let's take and shift now. Student demand is important, but it isn't the only thing. You do need to look at employment and understand what's going on and whether your graduate's going to emerge and get jobs. Fortunately, the story here is, but you could argue it's a mixed bag. I think it's actually good news. Relative to last year, we're down substantially, 28%. But month over month, we're actually up. And I think the month over month number is actually more important right now. Last year, we were coming out of COVID, and there was a huge bump in job openings, record-setting numbers of job openings as people tried to replace the workers that they'd laid off during COVID. So those numbers, if you will, are inflated relative to normal job posting volumes. And that's why I think you see this big drop off year over year from 2022 to 2023. That's why I would focus on the monthly change. And despite the Fed's best efforts to lower the overall number of job postings, and you can see some success there. Last month we actually grew, so the job market remains very robust. Let's see what's growing in job postings. Well, teaching assistants, it turns out, and elementary school teachers, a lot of education here, coaches, secondary school teachers, preschool teachers. And then a little bit further down the list, you can see education administrators, middle school teachers, and child and family school social workers. When I see something like that, I suspect there's some seasonality here that's going on, and May may be a big month for hiring. But I also think we have a bit of a shortage in terms of teachers, and that's why you're seeing this volume of job openings, not necessarily job postings. Not sure anybody wanted to hire people, but they're being forced to hire people to replace folks who may have left. Couple of other things here, psych techs, and anything to do with psychiatry, psychology has been pretty big recently as we deal with the mental health crisis. Now, what's highest in terms of certifications? Turns out keeping a secret is really important. So these are obviously government jobs or government-related jobs, but secret clearance turns out to be the highest volume certification required out there with 13,000. Basic life support coming in second. You can see another health program here, nurse practitioner, third. And then we have board certified behavior analyst and advanced life support filling out the healthcare. A couple of other things here, CPA, professional engineer, and insurance license also making the top 10. And these are certifications that we find in job postings that we scrape off the web. What occupations are growing? Now, there's a mix here of things that require college and things that don't. But even when you're mixing those together, and yeah, I would have expected a lot of the growth just because the sheer volume of job postings that don't require college, I would have expected the list to be dominated by that. But it's not. And the number one, home health aides, yeah, that's clearly not a college program. And we got a couple of other stockers and fillers, laborers and movers and such, but almost half our list is college, jobs that require a college degree, general and operations managers, project managers, software developers, Q&A, registered nurses, human resource specialists, and marketing research analysts and marketing specialists. So the college requirement is alive and well and growing. Now, some places are shrinking or some occupations are shrinking. Fortunately, not many of them require a college degree. You can see substitute teachers and computer programmers down a bit. I think you're seeing here a little bit of the post-epidemic decline in the biggest of the tech companies. So they dropped a little bit and laid off tens of thousands of people. So I think that's hitting us here. But by and large, the rest of the decliners are all things that require personal service. Some of this may still be bounced back from the recession. Keep in mind, this is over the time period from 2012 to 2022. So it's a very long-term trend. But things that require sort of hands-on, face-to-face with customers seem to be taking a hit in this data. So as I say, I think we're probably still seeing a little bit of the aftermath of COVID in that last year. There's another important concept here, and I apologize if any of you heard this before, but I'll keep saying it because I think a lot of people believe that there's a linear relationship between what people study and what they go off and do in life. And, briefly put, that's not true. There are one or two programs that have a very high correlation between what's studied and what job you go do. The highest of those, I believe, is nursing, where some almost 80% of the graduates of nursing programs will go on to become nurses. But you'll notice that's only 2% of our overall sample of programs, which had some 634 programs in it. So very, very few programs have that high correlation between what people study and what people do. And most programs, in fact, 78% of programs, less than 20% of their graduates will go on into fields for which they're directly prepared. So fundamentally, people are going to go off and try all sorts of things until they find their calling. Let's take an example. If you take that sort of linear concept and say, what if people who graduate with a degree in physics do? In effect, what should they do? Well, there are 4 or 5 things that the National Center for Educational Statistics think are relevant with that degree. And here they are: natural science managers, physicists, that makes sense, physics teachers, and secondary school teachers. That's, however, a very limited view of the world. In reality, physics majors go into 360 fields, not 4. And number 1 doesn't sound like something that has anything to do with physics. It's software development. And it's number 1 by a long shot. Then we have engineering, computer programmers, yes, some teaching, but computer systems, CEOs, civil engineers, and so forth. So and this list goes on for 360 more slots. So keep that in mind. And I think this is very important, especially in things that are, you might call the humanities and sciences. This is going to be very, very true. You're going to see 4, 5, 6% of the students in those fields go on into occupations for which they've been directly prepared. I think the implication is, however, that broad education actually serves them in good stead. They do go on and find jobs in other areas. They have a lot of different opportunities open and available to them. And this whole mythology that if I go into the sciences and humanities, I'm not going to be able to get a job is just that. It's a myth. It's not true. And not only do you go into those fields, but you make very good money. 90,000 compared to the U.S. median, which is about 46,000 in terms of annual pay. So liberal arts majors and the humanities do just fine.
Bob, we do have one more question before you go to the next slide, please. Where do teaching occupations fall in the correlation of career prep? And they were wondering if it's close to as high as nursing.
Monica, if you're on, it would be great to pull that data up. I wouldn't want to quote you a number without looking at it, but I'm pretty sure they're still down, 20 to 40% would be the highest I would imagine they get to, but we'll actually find the number for you.
Yeah, I'll go do it, post it in the chat.
Great. And thank you. It's a great question. Obviously, the profile is different for every program. Within that overall statement that very few actually have more than 20% of their graduates going into the field for which they're prepared. Now, I should add one other thing. depends on degree level. So a bachelor's graduate in education is more likely to go off and do something besides education. Once you get your master's, I think you've sort of declared, and you're very likely to stay in education, at least for a few years. And as all of you know, most of those folks who go out and start teaching aren't going to stay teaching. So you may well be preparing them not just for their first job, but for the job that comes after that, when they've been in a third grade classroom for a year and recognize just how hard that work really is. So let's look at what graduates' real career paths are. I mentioned that they don't all go to exactly what you'd expect, but what do those look like? I apologize, very difficult chart to read. We're going to reformat it, but I'll walk you through it. So we take a typical history grad, and this is from a longitudinal data set we have of some 70 million people and what their jobs and employers were over the last 20 or 30, over their career, really. We started in 2002 for this particular chart. This graduate became a voice consultant. Well, they didn't teach people how to sing. What they're really doing there is selling phone systems, voice phone systems. Then they went to become a marketing director, went on from that back into sales account manager. Then they started selling this is business development, so that's really sales, in financial wellness. So this would be selling financial advisory services, and then became director of corporate sales, in this case for the YMCA. So in effect, our history graduate went into sales and did a variety of different sales jobs. Over this time period, they've been in 5 different positions in 20 years. So they basically changed jobs every 3 or 4 years. Philosophy graduate, pretty different. They started out in agriculture in the Peace Corps, stayed on in agriculture, then shifted, became a technical trainer, did some research and writing, and then they found their calling, I think is what's going on here. They became a production manager, and then this is video production, stuck with that, albeit at a different company, and then became a manager and director in a production company. So you can see that person sort of searching for what they loved, and I think finding it and continuing with it for the next 10 or 12 years. Our English graduate seems to have had the most difficulty here and least early return on their degree. Started out in sales and did that for 5 years. That's a long time to be a retail sales associate with a college degree. Then they did get promoted or moved up, really. Sales manager at the Gap, really moved back down, became a sales partner. It sounds a lot like a salesperson to me. And then it seems they found their path. They started in special ed, then went into teaching English, and now are the department head for the English program in a middle school. So 5, 6 years, well, it's more longer than that, actually. It's about 6 years into their career. They left sales and went into teaching and have stuck with that. Psychology also started in sales. Tough sled here, almost 10 years in. They're still a teller, but then they found what they like to do in the New York State, became a director of scheduling, a chief of staff, community outreach coordinator, and reached the level of director of workforce development in New York City. So ultimately found a good spot. Notice there's also a year of unemployment sprinkled in. And finally, our economics graduate looks as though they've done the best financially. They stuck with one company for the longest of anybody on this list. All these jobs are with Earthfare, and ultimately became the director of commerce for an organic food producer. So when we're thinking about what we're preparing people for, this is like 5 to 7 jobs at least, and that's just in the first 20 years of a career. There are going to be more after that as well. So it's, and they're often quite diverse. Some of them, there's a trend that you can pick out. Some there's not. Often there's a stint in sales. So that people really need to have the ability and the foundation to go into a variety of fields, because that's probably what they're really going to do. So let's take a look at one program in some depth, and we're going to focus in on the market side of this program and share a little bit of information on the economics for margins as well. So we're going to look at student demand, employment, competition, and degree fit for one program. First, let's look at that all together. And this is a ranking sheet. So on the left is the program. This goes down 1,500 programs long. There's an overall score that takes individual ratings and rankings on about 50 individual metrics. We group those into student demand, competitive intensity, jobs or employment, and finally degree fit. You'll notice that the page is color-coded. That's true for a great deal of what we do. The dark green means it's the 98th or 99th percentile, so one of the best. The light green means you're down in the 96s. You can see it shading off. And by the time you get to pink, you're at the 40th percentile and below. Why do we percentile? Well, why do we color code? Because when you're looking at a blizzard of numbers like these, just physically figuring out which one's higher than the other is very difficult across what's about 30 or 40 numbers here. But with the colors, it's trivial. So it really does help folks to be able to look at a page and in a second really understand what the data is saying about the programs overall, and shortly thereafter you can understand what's happening to any individual program. Today we're going to look at neuroscience, which is not quite in our top slot, 98th percentile overall, very strong student demand, lots of competition. You can see it's only at the 14th percentile for competition. That's not great, but good job market at the 94th percentile. And we've got a rank of 50. That means that all of these, that's just a neutral ranking because we're looking at several different degree levels. So we can't really set it up to pick out or favor one degree level because that would be incorrect for the other degrees that we're looking at. What's happening in student demand? Well, this actually looks pretty good. We're at the 85th percentile in Google search volume, and you can see everything else is green. Except online, which is still healthy at the 77th percentile. So very good showing in terms of overall student demand for this program. Also, I'm going to point out that internationals at the 95th percentile, so this is a program that's of great interest to international students, one of the growth avenues in higher education. Speaking of growth, some of these metrics are good and some are not so good. If you look, the older metrics or the metrics that are more dated, I guess a better way of saying it. Completion volume's up 10%, but remember that reflects what people are looking for 4 or 5 years ago. New student enrollment still up 8%. That's about a year old, but that's not bad. Google search though is beginning to give us a warning signal, down 1%. So this is one where I'd keep an eye on it if I were running it in terms of what I'm doing from staffing and number of sections I'm going to run, and keep track of how my enrollment is doing. Because I may be looking at at least a flattening, if not a dip, coming up. Now, let's take a look at jobs and see what's happening in the job market for people with this degree. Now, first thing I'm going to point out is the percentage doing what they're supposed to be doing, if you will, in direct prep jobs, going into fields for which they were directly prepared. That's only 18%. Remember, that's actually not bad, but it's still only 18%. So 82% of students who take this program are not going to end up doing anything related to neuroscience directly. Job postings are good, not great. You can see they're 58th to 70th percentile, so above average, but not significantly above average. Job postings also okay, 73rd to 82nd percentile. Growth is good. 1 year up 2%. The 3-year growth rate's been up 6%, and the BLS forecast is up 0.5%. I don't put too much stock in that. 80% of those forecasts are off by 50% or more. So I tend to look at the trend rather than the estimated growth from BLS. It's fine to take that into account, but I would not overweight it when you're trying to make program decisions because it's got a lot of noise. Now, this is a key metric, I think, job postings per graduate. That's a way of understanding whether the job market is saturated, i.e. do I have too many graduates for the number of jobs available? And here we're starting to get a warning sign with 33rd percentile, one job opening for every, or job posting for every graduate. That's a little worrisome, but when I see wages like this, I get less concerned. People in this field making $146,000 BLS mean wage. And for folks age 30 to 60 from the American Community Survey, very similar, $146,000 a year. So they're doing pretty well. Notice the difference between the under 30 and the 30 to 60. When we see that kind of a jump, it almost always means somewhere in there's graduate school. And so people have come out, they don't do very well for a few years, they go back to school, and they get the additional training they need to really excel in the field. So that's usually what's going on when you see with that a triple in pay from under 30 to over 30. Now, it would certainly be true here, potentially going on to med school. Now, what's going on most recently in May, medical scientists and environmental scientists were in high demand. Some 2,500 jobs for medical scientists, excluding epidemiologists. Not surprisingly, we need doctors, but also biotech, engine and technicians, natural sciences manager, and biological sciences. We look at it by job title. We've got, these are pretty small numbers, mind you, because at the job title level, the data gets very fragmented because people name things, all sorts of things. And there's just a lot of different jobs out there. So, we're looking at 147 as the largest single job title for environmental scientist. And then you can see clinical research assistant, research scientist, and so forth. We even have a nursing job that made the list here as a related field with some 83 job postings. And this is what they really do. Again, not a very high correlation between what they studied and what they do. But there's some good, solid healthcare jobs here. Medical and health service managers. We've got some teachers, general managers, physical and social science technicians, physical scientists, but HR, software, registered nurses, business operations, and medical transcriptionists. So as in many other degrees, these folks go into a variety of different fields after graduation. Competition is pretty stiff. You won't be the first college to think of offering neuroscience. 235 other schools already do. 14 added the program last year or had their first completions last year. So people have smartened up and focused on this, but I still see it being fairly healthy. Median program completions are 17. So if you think of that as a 4-year program, so I've got at least 4 times that plus some attrition, you've probably got 100, 120 students in this program at a college, pretty healthy number. And when I think about competition, my Google competitive indexes are both fine, 45th percentile, and then the Google competition index itself, 19th percentile. So not a super competitive program if you're trying to attract students using online marketing. And interestingly, it's not an online program yet. Only one institution offers it online. So that may in itself be an opportunity to be one of the first to offer it not on campus, but online. And I don't think there's anything about this that can't be taught online. Certainly you could do it with low residency, have people come to your campus for a couple of weeks a year. So that may be an open window, if you will. It's a relatively large and healthy program. Now, let's take a look at degree fit. Looks like a bachelor's degree by and large. On the left-hand side, when you think about what programs degree level people seek, we've got a little bit of representation at the master's and doctoral level. 6% at the doctoral level is actually pretty high. So really any of these 3 degree levels could be appropriate for this program, probably least of all the master's, and certainly anything lower than bachelor's doesn't seem to be attracting really any students to speak of. When it comes to jobs, the picture's a little bit different. As you might imagine, in jobs for neuroscientists, 36% of the folks have a doctorate, 23% have a master's, and only 28% actually have a bachelor's degree. So it's kind of reassuring to know that people are doing our neuroscience aren't just bachelor's degree graduates by and large. When demographics of the program, so what do we mean by that? Who takes this program? And we take a look at this because every program has its own profile. And if you're trying to do program evaluation, you need to be very careful to make sure that with the programs you select, both to start or stop or grow, that you're not accidentally changing the demographics on your campus in a way that you didn't intend. So for example, if you added a neuroscience program, you'd be primarily attracting women, 70%, and only 30% of the students are likely to be men. It's going to be about average in terms of white enrollment and well above average in terms of Asian enrollment, and then declining from there with very low enrollment from, for example, the Black or African American community. So as I say, keep this in mind as you change your program portfolio over time. you are unconsciously changing your demographics of the students on campus. And it's worthwhile to step back and say, wait a sec, before I make that change, what's going to happen to those demographics over time, given the programs I'm emphasizing or de-emphasizing. And then we put it all together on one page. We do this so that decision makers have everything in one place. And you can tell really at a glance that this is a pretty attractive program. We've got a good overall score. Of course, that's dark green, so I don't even need to look at the number to know it's pretty good. Student demand is green, so I can, again, at a glance, know that's good. I can see how almost everything is green, and I can come back and say, well, what's my problem? Well, Google search is off a little bit. So again, the colors really help. I can see my employment is basically okay in terms of volume, very good on pay, and my competitive intensity is worrisome. A lot of people have it, but my saturation metrics are fine. So what we find is if you get used to using this template, you can have a pretty good sense of a program in really a minute or two. And then if you want to dive in, there's plenty to dive into. But if you're just trying to check on the health of a program, it can be done fairly quickly. And again, if you can identify areas where you may need a deeper dive, but not every program, and certainly not every metric is going to warrant a deep look on a regular basis. Now let's leave markets and start to look at the internal data you have to indicate the health of a program. In particular, here we're looking at margins per student credit hour. And what we have are benchmarks and the actual performance, disguised performance of a college. So the black bar is our disguised college performance. The green is a 75th percentile of our benchmark data set. Blue is the median, and the red bar is a 75th percentile. So since we're looking at contribution, you'd like to be to the right of the median on contribution. Obviously, contribution is the money left over after you've taught the course. And you can see that this particular institution for geography, for example, is beating the benchmark by a little bit. French, not so much. Their margins are well below the norm. And neuroscience specifically, they're well above the norm in terms of contribution. So again, that's a good thing. They're doing pretty well. But we can do this data analysis for you by program. We can also do it down to the course level and subject or discipline. So what does it cost me to teach 100 level English? So you get it at a level of precision that's really makes it possible for you to take action in a very data informed way. Now, I will also say, I just heard this story again today, which you got to be really careful. There's a lot of pressure in higher ed to reduce cost. And so people will go in and take programs that are expensive and talk about cutting them. Many high cost programs have very high margins, nursing in particular. When we looked at it, the benchmark nursing program had 40% higher margin than the average program. Now it's more expensive to teach, but because the structure of a nursing program is very, I guess you call it narrow. It looks like the trunk of a tree. And those nurses have to take most of the same classes. That means you have all of them sitting in the same classroom. That generally means the classroom is full, and you can afford to pay somebody more if they're teaching a full class. So it turns out the economics of running relatively few, relatively full, larger classes means that nursing is actually very profitable. And that's counterintuitive. Actually, it was counterintuitive to me, certainly to many of my clients. So be very careful. Don't let people make you make cuts based on cost data alone. You can really make a bad mistake that way. Now, another dimension of this is the variability of cost. And why does that matter? If you, and this is a kind of an ugly analogy, but if you think of a manufacturing plant, they measure whether that plant's under control by whether it can produce things with a relatively predictable cost, or, for example, measurement tolerances. So if I'm trying to produce a 3-inch bolt, I don't want it to roll off the end of the assembly line 5 inches long or 1 inch long. So they measure that variance, that variation from the intended length to the actual. In a well-run factory, that variance is extremely small. And we forgot this a little while, and the Japanese taught us over again. You know, when you say you're going to produce a 3-inch bolt, it needs to be 3 inches, no fooling, not 3 inches and 1 centimeter, and then as a result, not fit the intended use. What I see in higher ed in terms of cost is a lot of variability. You can see here my 100 level course, my 25th and 75th percentile are probably 5 times, one is 5 times the other. The client here is actually running it pretty tight, but 200, that variation starts to get more extreme. 300, it's going up. 400, we have a massive difference between the 25th percentile and the 75th. So in effect, my cost to teach is all over the place. And you see that again at the client by the time you get to the 400 level. But by and large, this particular, it's really an illustrative institution, running a pretty tight ship at 100 and 200 and even at 300 level. By 400 though, there's a lot of variability. Typically that's driven by some very small classes with very senior instructors. So managing that cost per student credit hour is actually an important concept in order to run, to achieve curricular efficiency is probably the best way to say it. But keep in mind overall in this example, they're actually running below norm. So it might not be appropriate for this particular institution to be looking at cutting more. In fact, you might be looking at some of these areas and saying, wait, am I actually under-resourced given that I'm so substantially below the benchmark? So let me summarize. Demand for bachelor's and master's programs is strong. Google searches are actually up. Google searches for business analytics had the fastest growth, 218% in May 2023. New enrollment in bachelor's programs is down slightly, unfortunately, and master's is down pretty big, 9%. Business analytics had the fastest growing enrollment at the bachelor's level. IT project management, second was the fastest growing master's program. In May, job postings were down 28% year over year, but up 13% month over month. And our program of the month, Neuroscience, is really quite healthy, good student interest, good jobs, especially good wages. Lots of competition, but not a lot of evidence that the market is saturated yet. So overall this month, I think we're looking at pretty positive news, perhaps more about what's likely to happen going forward than what actually happened. I think the trend up in Google search volume and the beginning of some new enrollment growth, well, that's really not fair. The new enrollment growth is still down, both at bachelor's and master's, but I think there's some hope that we're coming to the end of that. And as I mentioned from some work we did just yesterday, the enrollment numbers are up at community colleges. So I hope that that flows through to all of you as those students transfer into 4 years. With that, thank you very much. Happy to look at an individual program and just let us know what you'd like to have a look at. Has Winnell joined us?
Yes, I have.
Hey, Winnell, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Any questions before we go and look at programs you may be interested in?
I think we already have one program.
Okay.
We actually have 2 different requests. One is the one on behavioral analysis. We also have a request that's more of something for Coursera, which is extended reality, VR, AR, non-credit categories.
Yeah, it's interesting. We looked at that as an emerging program, I think 2 years ago. I think it's very, very promising. I'm not completely sure that extended reality is going to take off the way people intended, but I'm sure it has its place. Lots of interesting things to do on the development side, because there are very practical uses of that degree in things like architecture, in creating virtual walkthroughs of buildings. So it's not all about making games. All right, let's do one. What do you want? You set one out?
Yeah, I am. I'm just, I sent you a direct message. I tried to be low key here, but I just need to share my screen. Thank you very much. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. I have a scorecard opened up for the closest thing we can get to behavioral analysis, which would be applied behavioral analysis. When I think of behavioral analysis, I think of like Criminal Minds and that role. I'm not sure if this is exactly that, but this is the closest we can get, the zip code level here. I put in a math.
That's not quite what this is. This is often children.
Yeah.
And while they may have some level of criminal behavior, usually not.
I hope not.
Understanding things like development and development disabilities.
Great. So I filtered this in at the master's level. I am seeing 9% completions at the bachelor's level, so it does exist, but most of the completions here were at the master's level. So I did bring in a master's rubric. And immediately what strikes to me here is, the student demand being green and then the employment being this light yellow, which isn't as,
Like
strong as the green, but it's still, better than average.
like blue.
And then we're going to see this pink for competitive intensity. So what does this tell me? Students are interested in this. There is student demand for this program. There are jobs. There is employment opportunity. The real question here is going to be, how do I compare to the other folks that are already kind of in this field, the other institutions that are already offering this program? The things that I highlight here in student demand would be, new student enrollment is very high. And then the sum of on-ground and online completions are both very strong as well. And when we're looking at this in terms of change volume, enrollment and completion volumes are increasing year over year. Okay. When it comes to employment, I would probably immediately look at things like the wages here, 10th and mean wages here being at the 39th and 52nd percentile. The mean wage at 63,000 here, not attributing any points. 4,400 job posts.
No, I would look at the ACS wages because only 5% of the people in this field are going into jobs which are directly prepared. So really what we need to know is what do they really do, which is what we can tell from the ACS. So that's a pretty good wage. It's not fabulous, but a pretty good wage in the 30 to 60 category. Again, probably grads. Well, this is a graduate degree that we're looking at anyway.
Yep.
But not a lot of jobs actually either way.
Yeah, and we can see that here in the job postings per graduate being under 1 for a saturation metric.
And even the ACS jobs, they're not a lot.
And then I'll just quickly jump down to the competitive intensity here, and we'll see 93 campuses with graduates. This has increased by 9 year over year. So 9 new campuses in this market. And this is for master's level. I think it's master's and grad certificate actually. Median program completions of 7 with an average program completion of 24. And 53% of completions are online here. I would highlight that as well.
Yeah, so it's a working adult that's taking this. I am a little worried about that median completions number too. To have a master's program and only have 7 students complete a year, it's a bit worrisome. That means you probably only have 15 to 20 students in the whole program. So I would be concerned if I were thinking about launching this, that it might turn out to be a pretty small program.
And then I saw in the chat, Monica mentioned, I think it was organizational behavior, could be some overlap here. Organizational behavior studies. This might be more, it's in the business family. So this might be more of like an organization sense.
Yeah, this is more about politics, organizational politics.
Yeah.
Structure and things like that.
And this is more of a bachelor's program too. So might not quite be exactly the same here. What else do we have in the chat?
Looks much weaker. Again, as you guys are probably noticing, once you get used to this, you can glance at this and tell that this isn't in the league with our other ones. Student demand's not as high. Employment is actually pretty low. It's in that yellow color. Competition is tough. And so, just intuitively, this wouldn't jump out at me as something I might want to start. Not impossible, but probably not. If I had it, it's not bad. It might not be an area to invest in, but I certainly wouldn't be on the, unless you had some particular issue with the institution. There's nothing about the market that says you would want to cut this program. I just don't know if you'd want to get into it either.
And I see something about emergency preparedness and police programs. I suspect that
if you put up emergency, there are a few of those.
Yeah, I suspect that's going to be more of like a family of programs. So for that, just really quickly, I'm not sure if those would be at the master's level, but of course we can look that up.
Usually not. I think I've looked at this for one of our clients. So I like the idea of going back to sort of picking out the 4-digit as you were talking about, seeing what the individual programs are.
Yeah, I intentionally stopped sharing here. I'm gonna go ahead and readjust the rubric. And then what I'm gonna do is I am going to look at the family of programs here. And the way that we're gonna do that is by selecting a 2-digit family. Let me come back to sharing my screen. I'm gonna type in emergency. I see 51s, so I'm gonna come into the 51s here.
But it's not quite, no, that's a healthcare.
Be health
part.
professions.
I think there's maybe try crisis. Or
Yep, 43.
yeah, there you go.
There we go.
And just for clarity, if we'd done the other, we would have been more into a specific emergency support, like the emergency room, a medical field, which I don't think is what was intended.
Yeah, I heard.
So let's see. That crisis emergency disaster management is about 3/4 of the way down the list. That may be close to what the person's looking for. It does reasonably well. Student demand's pretty good. Employment doesn't look fabulous.
Yep, sounds like students are interested, but they don't know what to do with it or can't find jobs with it. I saw data analytics and that's a good one in here.
Yeah, that does well on every criterion.
We also have healthcare compliance as a request.
I don't know if I've ever seen compliance. But we can look.
Certificate in professional Spanish. Cool. So this is the crisis emergency disaster management. You know, immediately the first thing I do when I open up something like this is I do like to take a look at the completions by level, just to make sure we're looking at this in the right scope. And we do see a split here between bachelor's and master's, so I would consider that. Right now, we do have this kind of filtered in at the bachelor's level where appropriate. So keep in mind the competition will be focused at the bachelor's level here. Again, the color coding will kind of tell you that story at a high level, and you'll work your way into the details. You know, at a high level, what do I see here? Employment isn't doing so great, and this seems to be competitive. Naturally, there will be some questions that will follow that, right? Why is it competitive? Who are we going up against? Who are the institutions that are in this market? How do we compare? All of that will be and can be answered with the system. Right now, we're just looking at kind of the macro level details of the metrics. Student demand is strong, I would say here, even though we're seeing this light blue and it's different than that green, it's still relatively strong. Where is it strong? You know, Google search volumes are above average. Online completions are very strong in this case. So I'd see online completions at 700. This is at a 96th percentile. This goes hand in hand with a online viability metric that we have here called National Online Percentage of Completions, which will see 58% of completions happening online for this program.
My guess of what's going on here is that this is people who are already in law enforcement or related Homeland Security area, and they're taking this program while they're working. So that's an important distinction. If you're trying to attract, say, high school graduates to something like this, it might not be so successful. The target market here is people who are working in the field. That would be my guess anyway.
And I just see an anonymous question here. Is it possible to disaggregate master's degrees specifically in education? We can't give you the difference between an MA or an M.Ed, but we can aggregate for master's versus grad certificate versus certificate. But the MA versus MED there, we won't be able to, at the iPads level here, aggregate. There are ways that we could work around and try and figure out, you know, for example, we could dive into the job postings, and if the job postings have specific qualifications, educational qualifications, we might be able to spot those and the differences between those in the job postings data, which is different than this view. This would be actually kind of diving into the total within one of our other applications, and then mining the data that way. social worker related program. Sorry, we're getting a bunch of questions, which is great. I'm just trying to get to the ones that I can see here. I know there was data analytics. Maybe I should just open that one quickly and we can end it there.
I just want to mention that for any of the questions that we don't get to, we can certainly follow up by email or set some time to meet.
We are at the top of the hour, so we should probably wrap it up. People are going to want to get back to their day jobs.
Okay. Let me see if I can just quickly get this to open up here. It's pouring rain in Florida right now, so I do apologize. Data analytics. Yeah, stop sharing my screen. Okay, here we go. It looks like about 25 people rather be here than back at their day jobs, which is always great. So data analytics is loading up here. Really quickly, you'll see that all the things Bob mentioned, this is going to be performing really strong across all categories, student demand and employment. I suspect the competition might be pink. Yeah, and there it is. Student demand and employment are very strong. The question here really is going to be, who else is in this market already and how do we compare? And keep in mind that there is a pretty even split here between bachelor's and master's and some post-bac certificates as well. You know, if I was working with a client on reviewing this, I would probably start here after confirming there's interest and job opportunities. And I would want to look at the trend data around completions and enrollment just to try and find a pocket, right? If it's already super competitive and already there's a lot of institutions in this market, what is the pocket that will be best served at the award level? We can look at trends for enrollment and completions and maybe find that certain award levels are increasing more than others year over year in a 5-year trend and look at it that way. I don't think this will be a question of whether we should or shouldn't. It's more of at what level should we? Anything to add there, Bob?
No,
Okay.
you know, this is a program that is big enough and growing fast enough that even being late is probably fine.
Mm-hmm.
You don't often see that. There are only a couple of these where I think the market is so robust right now that you could be a late entrant and still do pretty well. The other one's cybersecurity.
And I saw the pouring rain in Florida in the summer. Yeah, small jokes. I think we get at least 2 thunderstorms a day right now. We're at peak hurricane season, I guess. Has it even started? I don't think so.
All right, I think we're good. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate it. And all of us do. Again, thanks to all the folks that make this possible, Marianne and Monica in particular. And then I'd like to invite all of you to join us and have a listen to our newest thing, which is a podcast series on how to grow an academic institution. So this, you don't have to listen to me. This is really people who've done it, talking about how they managed to grow. And it's primarily small independent colleges, but as we move on, we're going to talk to some larger schools as well, because even the big guys, a few of them have figured out how to grow and do it with some consistency. So I do this because I think I'd really like to get everybody out there healthy again. I believe it's possible. And there's I hope we'll be uncovering some really good tools that you can use to get enrollment back on track.
And
Thank
we
you.
do have an episode dropping tomorrow. And Bob, should I tell our remaining 16 people who it is, or should I let them be
Sure, go
surprised?
ahead.
We are actually having Matthew Krelin, who is the program officer at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And it's pretty interesting because we're going to be talking about, or Bob will be talking about, breaking barriers.
Yeah, it's got a very much of a focus on how to grow while improving diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Matt's a great guy, and it really isn't listening to me, it's listening to Matt. So I think it's fun, and you're welcome to have a listen. Thanks everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.